this presentation today is part of our work with the SBIR, STTR America Seed Fund. And we are directly supporting those that are submitting SBIR grants to the water topics as well as the solar topics. If you have any questions, there's some just FAQ emails just to keep in mind. And then I'll give you some more information on just how to receive some additional support. Like I said, we are a power connector, which means the Department of Energy selects many different resources throughout the country. We're one of 20 that they've selected to provide resources and information and support to entrepreneurs that are looking for funding opportunities in clean energy. But here's just a quick list of some of the others throughout the country. And if you're interested in learning more about that, you can go to the AmericanMadeNetwork.org. Next slide. Those that are specifically supporting these water and solar topics are a group of 5 power connectors.
Today, we're going to talk about another set of foundational concepts, i.e. strategy, organization, team building, and culture. And again, the focus here is to make sure that you're familiar with some of these enduring ideas of modern business so that as you're forming your business and planning to grow and scale, you have this in the back and the front of your mind as you start to structure your organization. If you recall, one of the core concepts that we started with last week was this idea of theory of the firm, which says that the reason for being for most businesses, especially for-profit businesses, is to maximize profitability over the long term. And one of the ways that you can get to sustainable revenues is by achieving a milestone known as product market fit. One of the other critical aspects of achieving profitability is the attention that you pay on your firm's strategy. Today, we're going to talk about strategy, what it is, what it's not. It is mostly focusing and looking inside your firm and talking about and realizing what your competitive advantage is, while keeping an eye on the external marketplace and understanding what your competition is. These were ideas that were developed 40, 50 years ago by a top management scholar named Michael Porter, along with Clay Christensen, and then later Scott Stern, C.K. Prahlad, especially when you're coining the term core competence. We want to understand the importance of strategy development, and it's the significance of choosing amongst competing options and making trade-offs as you move to determine the market position you want to take as you grow your organization. It'll also give you familiarity with classic frameworks that you may already have seen and are using in your business today. Another key concept that we want to start looking at is how to structure your organization. And this is all about making sure that you prioritize allocation of resources and identify what your priorities are so that you can align your company with your company's purpose to deliver that very important customer value proposition. We also want to kind of talk about the common mistakes that business owners make when guiding the organization or when developing strategy. And we'll finish off just with a touch of what types of business and entities exist, and I'll point you to some resources that are at your disposal should you want to dig into those. So for today's agenda, as I said, key concepts around competitive advantage and what is differentiation, Porter's 5 forces and industry structure, the notion of value chain. I do want to talk specifically about challenges that entrepreneurs face when choosing amongst different options that are available to them, organization and team development, and like I said, entity formation. So what we begin with is the definition of a strategy. There's a famous paper named What is Strategy by Michael Porter, and it outlines the definition of what's called a sustainable competitive advantage. Competitive advantage is defined as a specific set of attributes or resources that you have as a founder or a business that are your strengths that you can use to achieve a superior market position and long-term profitability for your business. And very importantly, using that advantage to compete with your rivals in the industry to extract profits. It is also, strategy is also about creation of a unique and valuable market position that involves choosing a set of strategic activities and making choices about how you orient the company, which is, do you want to serve few needs of many customers or many needs of a niche market or a few customers, or want to be serving broad needs of many customers in a narrow market. And there are tools that you can use to facilitate some of this choice making. It's also very important to understand that strategy is not operational excellence. Like innovation, strategy is a overused, misused term and often deployed in the wrong way. Like I said, strategy is about choices, trade-offs. It is not about productivity improvement. It is not about, TQM, total quality management, or cost reduction. It is about market position, competitive advantage, so on and so forth. And very importantly, making choices of what you're not going to be. What I wanted to introduce here on this slide are what are called Porter's generic strategies. They're framed along two main axes. One, as you see on top, is identifying your sources of competitive advantage, typically around a cost position or a position of uniqueness or differentiation, and also making sure that you are clear about your scope. That's either narrow scope defined by geography, segment, customer segment, or market that you're serving, or a very, very broad scope as defined by your customer choices, geography, so on and so forth. And whether you want to lead or whether you want to be very, very focused in your choices. And as you start kind of mapping your options along these sort of four dimensions, you can look at examples of companies that started out as very small firms, but then became the Walmart of the world. Clearly, you can see that Walmart had chosen a cost leadership strategy and is now a market leader today. Similarly, Southwest. Differentiation strategy is all about determining to be different and unique. And that is typically based on knowing if you have a strength around your product or certain capabilities within your business that allow you to be different, and making sure that you invest in your company to move up in the market along that differentiation axis. And some of the very famous examples are Apple and Starbucks, household names that we all know of. If you're determined to be a narrow focus or a narrow scope company, but also want to lead along that cost axis, we want to focus on a very niche market, you could think of examples such as Home Depot, Trader Joe's, all these, so on and so forth. But you are, again, focusing on a very narrow market and making choices about your price position. Similarly, if you want to be narrow focused but compete by being a differentiated company, some of the examples that are in this box include luxury goods companies like Rolls-Royce or Louis Vuitton. One of the other strategic tools that was invented by, again, Michael Porter, that allows you to structure your company in very distinct activity areas is called the value chain. It allows you to disaggregate your company into very strategically relevant activities in order to focus on what you want to do internally and what you want to outsource. So I just wanted to kind of offer you this framework and a chart. Typically, these are fairly intuitive choices on departments that are, building the product, departments that are doing sales and marketing. And often when you are a founder, a small business, you have, a couple people, few people in your team that are doing a lot of these activities under one hat. But as you start to grow, it becomes very important to make sure that you distinguish between the primary activities of your firm and things that you're going to insource and things that are supporting activities that you're going to outsource to allow you to be more efficient. The value chain tool can apply at multiple levels, i.e. at a company level, at an industry level, at a country level. And typically it applies to what are known as vertically integrated businesses. And the notion of a broader value chain where you have suppliers, think of raw material firms that are feeding into your company, where you're the buyer, and then your downstream channels or distributors that you're feeding into, and it becomes part of a bigger value system, i.e. multiple companies that are forming different parts of the value chain that aggregate to become an industry. One example of an industry value chain that I wanted to give you here is a solar value chain. As you can see, a solar module that's installed in a solar farm at a utility or on top of your house is the end product, but it starts out by sourcing raw material, which has companies tied to it, companies that make wafers that turn into solar cells, OEMs that are building modules, and then installers that install these systems at a farm or a roof. The next concept that I wanted to introduce, which is also a very sort of basic tool that's used around the world when thinking about a strategic plan or mapping your position, is what's known as 5 forces that shape your business strategy and what defines industry structure. And it is this map, typically 5 forces. It is the bargaining power of your customers, the bargaining power of your suppliers, the threat of new entrants, and threat of substitutes. And these dimensions of what forms industry competition become very important in terms of your awareness as you enter the market, because especially when you think about the bargaining power of suppliers, which influences the cost of your product, and the bargaining power of your customer, which influences the price they're willing to pay. Both of those elements form a very important part of your profit equation. And when you look at the threat of new entrants or threat of substitutes, it is, again, competition in a classic form, which is your customers can make decisions about switching to a new competitor in the market, especially if they promise to do the job better than your product. And then threat of substitutes, typically, which are inferior products or things that allow a customer to do the same job that they were trying to do for your product. And together, these forces combine to form what's called industry competition. And the knowledge of the dynamics that are playing out in the industry is a very important part of commercializing your product and winning in the marketplace. This also informs, as you are thinking through and understanding your market and what these forces are, it also allows you to do a very accurate analysis of your SWOT, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The next concept that I wanted to introduce is specifically applicable to entrepreneurs as they make choices about how to orient their company, especially tech-based businesses or IP-based businesses. There's a tendency for founders to just go out and enter the market in a rush without thinking about how they're going to capture the value. And not pay attention to sometimes customers that can become your competitors. And what I wanted to offer is, again, a frame that allows you to make some very deliberate choices about your attitude and your customers' attitudes towards innovation and the attitudes towards the incumbents that you're selling into. And as you start making these choices, what starts to emerge is a company orientation or a company identity. And you get very, very clear whether you are in a idea business or services business, a gadget business, so on and so forth, and a strategic signature that starts to inform what your brand is. And I'll quickly kind of walk through some of the obvious choices on or the generic strategies that are part of your options. Intellectual property strategy is all about the business that is going to control the IP, control the innovation, and move very, very slow and deliberate into the market to make sure that the IP is protected. And these companies are usually idea factories. A value chain strategy, very consistent to what we were talking about earlier, is all about how you're going to create value for partners or customers within an existing chain. And by taking this approach, you're avoiding direct competition and you are helping customers, typically downstream, by improving their product or their service through the value proposition you're providing. And typically, moving down a value chain strategy route, you're executing with speed into the market by constant experimentation because you want to get to your revenues fast. And sometimes it's a hybrid approach, conscious choices between balancing IP control and partnering with your customer or collaborator while having very, very strict rules and guidelines about IP protection and capturing value that you're creating for your customer. Along the right side are two other options. Architecture, which is all about becoming a platform business. What we've talked about so far is what's called the traditional vertically integrated business, where you are making a product and selling it into a one-sided market. These were conventional businesses till the internet came along and gave rise to the Googles, the Netflix, the Airbnbs of the world. And this approach typically applies to what's called two-sided markets, where your business is being an intermediary, bringing suppliers and consumers together and creating value through network effects. And it's a whole different approach, but it can also be a very, very specific choice if your product or service is more aligned to an architecture type strategy. And the last one here is what's a disruption strategy. This is typically a very radical approach. And you are going out in the market with typically a good enough product that's cheap, it's cost effective, but it's very, very convenient to underserved customers or non-consumers in the market. And you're also competing directly with the incumbents or the market leaders. So it's a very radical approach. And the examples that exist, many in the market today that took a disruptive route are, again, think Netflix, think Google, think Apple. It's a very different approach, but it is a choice. Next, I wanted to talk about sort of move from strategic frameworks that are options available to you as you go out into the market to kind of talking about allocation of resourcing and forming an organization and a team that allows you to deliver your value proposition. And here you want to pay attention to the structure of the business, the processes you want to invest in to build your capabilities, and the culture you want to cultivate in the firm to sort of kind of bind the team together. And one way to kind of think about how to build great teams through culture and systems is a very, very simple idea that allows you to sort of deliberately kind of think about what resources you need in your business, people, facilities, cash, and how you allocate them externally versus internally that are required to deliver the value proposition to the customer. Processes are, again, for a small company as an entrepreneur, you want to be very careful about selecting the processes that are needed at this stage of the company, at the current stage of your company, that allow you to be more efficient and consistent as your team comes together to do very, very repetitive tasks, i.e., doing experiments, doing planning, hiding, training, shipping samples. So there's a consistency, and as you do those over and over again, it sort of becomes the fabric of your business, the culture of your business on how things are done day in and day out. And it allows you to become more efficient and capable in delivering that value proposition. Priorities are typically a clear set of values and guidelines. So an organization of people can make decisions on what to do and what not to do. Again, it's all about choices and decisions, but it is important as a founder or a general manager or a leader of a small company to be clear on the principles of foundation as you grow the business. Next, we talk about recognizing signs when things are not going well, and recognizing how a winning team operates and how a mediocre team operates. And I wanted to offer a framework that's out of a famous book called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And on the right side here, a signature of a winning team is a team that's very focused on results and outcomes versus inattention to results and outcomes. Confronting difficult issues head on and not avoiding accountability. Becoming very, very clear and focused on what your mission is and what the goals of the team are so that you can execute with speed and deliver things on time. Being very open to constructive debate is another hallmark of winning teams. And then, of course, being human and avoiding kind of toxicity that breeds very easily when things are not going well. So I recommend this book highly. Teams and how they grow and how they work together is sort of intuitive for any general manager or a founder. But it's surprisingly how often and how quickly things can go bad. And one of the things that the leader should never do is fail to recognize when things are going wrong and address them very quickly. One of the tools that you may be familiar with that I want to offer as you start to think about how to organize your work and roles and responsibilities was called a RACI chart, which stands for Responsible, Accountable, Consult, and Inform. And it's important to make this very clear and visual to the members of a very, very small team, because in startups, there's a lot of overlap, there's lack of boundaries, and what can end up happening is either redundancy or not getting results because somebody thinks, you know, the other person is doing things when they're not, or there's overlap and inefficiency. So it's very clear to establish some guardrails on who's responsible, who's, you know, to be consulted or informed, and that typically resolves any kind of miscommunication or you know, inefficiencies. And as you start to grow, I would recommend that it's good to balance structure with fluidity, especially when you're a small company. But as you start to grow, it is important to establish boundaries and responsibilities so that you know who's accountable at the end of the day for any given function. Move to documents as our kind of next topic. It's not a sort of a framework or a topic in itself, but strategy manifests ultimately in a document or a business plan. And some of the elements of a business plan include your strategic intent. This would cover your mission, your purpose for being, a strategic marketing plan, which outlines your target segments, your ideal customer, their profiles, the industries you want to compete in, your competitive advantage. It also has elements of the investments you need to bring your business to fruition, financing, resources, talent, so on and so forth. It also has a very critical part of your business model, which is monetization, how you're going to make money. And very importantly, execution. How will you produce your product or your service and acquire customers? We will talk about operations next week, but they go hand in hand with strategy. And some of the operating documents as it relates to culture and organization are companies' policies. You don't, as a startup, you don't need to be, you know, very elaborate on policies, but it can get fairly unruly fairly quickly as you start, you know, putting humans inside an organization. So it's good to document your principles and your values and what's absolutely not tolerated in your company policy document and what's recognized. Remember that, you know, organizations are built by people, and people are incentivized to do things. They like recognition, they like appreciation, and it enables them to perform well. So it's also very important to articulate what behavior gets recognized and rewarded. Same thing with role descriptions. As you start to grow, it's clear to start separating what a, you know, head of engineering versus a head of product is going to do, how they collaborate, so on and so forth. And then key processes. You don't need to get very bureaucratic as a small company, but some documentation that outlines your procedures on how you hire, how you train, you know, how you specify your product, how you specify the process to make the product, customer requirements, pricing, coding, and how you remit that order are important in allowing you to be not only efficient, but credible as an organization, as well as efficient over time. And it becomes your capability, which is another kind of going back to the strategic concept of competitive advantage. I want to finish off with this last topic. I'm not an expert in it, but it's a very critical part of founding your business. And we have resources that are available to you that will provide. There's 4 main types of entities. C Corp, S Corp, a limited liability company, as well as a limited partnership. They are governed by various foreign laws around liability, tax implications, capital or mentor raise, ownership structure, how you trade publicly, and what management structures are allowed and not allowed, and what's applied to any of these four entities. And it's very well documented in this presentation that we have and will make available to you. There's also a YouTube video that will walk you through it. To finish off, I wanted to offer a couple of examples in books that you can read. These are classics written 30, 40 years ago. Competitive Advantage and Competitive Strategy by Michael Porter. One that I've not included in this list is what's known as a platform revolution. It doesn't apply to the type of firms that we've talked about, which is the vertically integrated, most of the value gets created inside the firm, in a one-sided market. So there's for these two, but if you're in what's called a platform business serving two-sided markets, there's another book called Platform Revolution by Marshall Van Eilstein and Jeffrey Parker that you can look up. And then also The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team was another bestseller in the New York Times for many, many weeks. And there's some links to the papers that I've borrowed from. And this last YouTube video is all about entity formation.